Hey, welcome back, guys. Welcome back. It's time to learn about more plants. um, wow, the semester is flying by. We are already in number 8, lab 8, and we only have lab 9 and lab 10 left, and then the whole semester is over. So summers just fly by. It's, you're trying to squeeze 15 weeks of material into basically a 5-week period. It's just woo, but good on you for staying with it. And we're going to get through this. We last time covered, starting to cover the plants that are actual plants in the plant kingdom. And we're going to keep doing that today. I have a feeling that this class is also going to take a long time. So I'm probably going to share this as 2 separate YouTube videos as I did for the previous lab. So let's just get right into it, right? We're in lab 8. So the last class, we covered a lot. We covered mitosis and meiosis. We covered alternation of generations. Got my tea. We learned about Gametophyte plants and Sporophyte plants, which at the beginning of that class, we were like, oh my, what are these long words? And now after, having that whole class, hopefully now you feel a little bit more comfortable with that, because alternation of generations is really important for all of the remaining classes that we have here in the basic plant science lab. And then we learned about mosses, liverworts, and hornworts, which collectively are the non-vascular plants or the bryophytes, right? And a little bit about asexual reproduction. So today, we're going to keep learning about plants that are in the plant kingdom. Today in particular, we're going to learn about vascular plants and a subset of the vascular plants, which are the spore plants. So the spore-bearing vascular plants or spore-shedding vascular plants. And those are the ferns, the lycopods, and the horsetails. So in the syllabus, and I think even in the lab itself, it uses things like the ferns and fern allies, or the ferns and the fern relatives of ferns. Well, not really. Ferns, lycopods, and horsetails, it's more like ferns and friends, because they're not really related. They used to be kind of lumped together because they all shed spores, but they are 3 separate lineages. We're going to talk about them today. Let's see. Oh, and then we will, because I said alternation of generations, something we can't get away from for the rest of the classes. And so, of course, we're going to have to talk about the alternation of generations as it pertains to these 3 plants. So last time we talked about the non-vascular plants. Today we're going to talk about the vascular plants. And I always like to get oriented before we do that. So here's the plant kingdom, right? The different components of the plant kingdom. Last time we talked about these non-vascular plants down here. So now we're moved up into the vascular plants, and in particular, the vascular plants that shed spores as versus the vascular plants that shed seeds. Those are what we'll cover in labs 9 and 10. So vascular plants that shed spores. So ferns, lycopods, and horsetails. So let's just briefly compare non-vascular plants with vascular plants. So we learned last time that non-vascular plants have no vascular tissue, right? That's what makes them non-vascular plants. They have no vascular tissue. And we learned that for the non-vascular plants that are living today, right, the gametophyte plants are the dominant generation. So when you look at a non-vascular plant, chances are you are looking at the gametophyte portion of that plant, because that's the portion that's around the most in that plant life cycle of that plant. And we learned that if you have a free-living dominant gametophyte in the non-vascular plants, the sporophyte is actually reduce even furthermore, such that it has to always be attached to the gametophyte plant, right? So the sporophyte plant is in the non-vascular plants is always attached to and dependent on that gametophyte plant. So to compare that with vascular plants, well, the main difference between a non-vascular plant and a vascular plant, the main difference is that vascular plants have vascular tissue, right? They have xylem and phloem. That's why we call them vascular plants. But in addition to that, there's some other things we can compare. So whereas the non-vascular plants had free-living gametophytes that were dominant, the vascular plants have free-living sporophyte plants that are dominant. So when you look at a vascular plant, chances are you're looking at the sporophyte plant, because that's the dominant part of that plant's life cycle. And on the on the dominant free-living sporophyte plants that are in the vascular plants, we have sporangia. So we still have sporangia, just like we did before. But now the sporangia is actually attached to leaves of the sporophyte plants, because now the sporophyte plants actually have leaves. Think about a second. What did the sporophyte plants look like in non-vascular plants, right? They didn't have anything fancy, right? They didn't have leaves. They were a lot of times just a little stalk with a little capsule on it. Now the sporophyte plant is a full-blown plant, right? Roots, leaves, stems, etc. And so sporangia are now going to be attached to the leaves of the sporophyte plant. And whereas the non-vascular plants had the reduced sporophyte plant, the vascular plants are going to have a reduced gametophyte plant. So the vascular plants we're going to talk about today are in 3 different phyla. The first phylum is Polypodiophyta. Remember, when you see that, I know I'm repetitive, but it helps you remember. When you see that ending phyta, you know you're talking about a phylum, right? So Polypodiophyta, which is the ferns. We'll talk about them today. The other phylum we're going to talk about is, the other 2 phyla that we're going to talk about are Lycopodiophyta, right, which are the lycopods. Lycopodiophyta, you're talking about a phylum. And Equisetophita, right, which is the horsetails. And you can see some examples of that in this summary slide. We're going to talk all about these guys today. All right, so we'll start with the ferns. Okay, so ferns. So ferns are in the phylum Polypodiophyta, right? And poly means many, many. And pody refers to a foot. So the word Polypodiophyta is the phylum of the many-footed things, many-footed plants. It's named because of that, and we'll see on the subsequent slides. We'll see what foot. What are we talking about? Plants don't have feet. Well, we'll see when we talk about it in a few seconds. They don't have feet, but we'll see what it means. But the reason the phylum is Polypodiophyta is because it's named after this large genus of ferns, which is Polypodium, very big genus of ferns. There's a lot of species. You don't need to know 11,000. I'm just saying there's a lot. There's a lot of species, and there's a lot of variation. There's a lot of variation in different sizes and habits. Habit means a form. Habit means form. And habitat. Habitat is where something lives, right? So we're going to see that right now. So look at this in terms of difference in diversity in size. So here are some examples of very small ferns. Those are on somebody's finger. So you get an idea of how very small those are, right? Just a few millimeters to a few centimeters big, really, really small. Some ferns are really, really small. Some ferns are really, really big. Some ferns can grow to be the size of a tree, and we actually call them tree ferns. Here are some examples of that along this river, right? All of these tree-like things. So here's one, right, with all of these things. These are ferns. So from the previous slide, we have just a few millimeters, a few centimeters to something that can grow to be like a tree size, 60 feet tall. And then ferns have a lot of diversity in habit or form. So one habit that ferns have, and this is a term we've come across before, is that they can be epiphytes, or what we say epiphytic. That means that they can live on other plants. Right? Here's a few examples here. Some ferns are aquatic, like the very small ferns we saw at the beginning that were on the person's finger. Those are examples of aquatic ferns. And so there's a lot of different ferns that can be aquatic. I think most of us are probably familiar with this type of habit, right? Small herbs. So if you're walking around in the forest or even in your neighborhood, maybe in your backyard, if you have one. I have a small backyard here in Brooklyn, and I have a few ferns back there. So this maybe even as a house plant. Ferns are sold as house plants. So this is probably the form most people are familiar with, is this kind of small herb habit. And as I mentioned, you can have tree-like. Arborescent just means tree-like. And so some ferns can be like a tree. And then ferns have a lot of diversity in their habitats of where they can live. So tropical rainforests, of course, have a ton of ferns. In fact, that's where the tree ferns will be found. Just to show you down here, the reason why I include this, I forget why I included this frog. I think it's because it has to lay its eggs on a specific type of fern. I don't remember why. But this bird I include because this bird actually makes a nest out of the top of a fern that grows as an epiphyte. So cute animals. There you go, cute animals. So tropical rainforest is one place you might find ferns. Another place you might find ferns is in the temperate forest. So this is the kind of habitat we have in our region, right? If you live in New Jersey or New York or Connecticut, Pennsylvania, you live in what's called the temperate forest region, temperate region, right? Look at this little deer. Look at he's munching. He's munching on a fern. See? I throw in animals when I can because I know everyone loves animals. Okay, I touched on this briefly before, but the ferns are economically important to humans in that they're sold as houseplants and landscape plants. Okay, so remember at the beginning I said Polypodiophyta, which is the name of the phylum, and that poly means many, and pody refers to foot. So this is kind of where it comes from. So ferns have stems that are also called rhizomes. You'll see that term rhizome in your lab, but rhizome just means a stem that grows horizontally, a horizontally growing stem as versus a vertically growing stem. And the rhizomes of ferns can be above the ground or below the ground. And the reason why we have the word Polypodiophyta, right, and Polypodium is because when whoever was describing ferns, they thought that these rhizomes kind of looked like little animals' feet, right? So maybe like a little rabbit's foot, something like that, little fuzzy foot. And so that's why we have the name Polypodiophyta, because of these fuzzy rhizomes that to whoever named this thought they looked like little fuzzy animals' feet. This is a slide we saw before in the leaf lab where to show you the diversity of fern leaf shape. And one thing we didn't mention back then is that so ferns and all the vascular, well, almost all the vascular plants that we're going to talk about have what are called megaphylls. Remember when we did the leaf lab and we talked about the venation of leaves and how you can tell like dicot and monocot apart, and how the monocot leaves have parallel veins and the dicot leaves have the kind of reticulate or net-like veins? In either case, each leaf has more than one vein, right? In the monocot leaves, you had parallel veins, right? In the dicot leaves, you had net-like veins, and then often between the bigger veins, lots of little veins in between. And that is a characteristic of what's called a megaphyll. Mega just means big, and phyll just means leaf. And so it's just, but it's something to point out because we're going to encounter a plant today that doesn't have megaphylls, so that's why I'm mentioning it to you. But megaphylls just means a leaf that has more than one vein. A leaf that has more than one vein. But look at all the diversity here. This is only leaves from ferns and just a crazy amount of diversity in leaf shape. And that makes sense because there's a lot of diversity in size and habitat and things like that. Alrighty. Okay, yeah, remember, so I just said megaphyll means a leaf that has many veins. And as you can see in this slide, these are examples of fern leaves. Remember, so this, don't get confused. This is not one leaf. This whole thing is a part of a leaf. This whole thing is part of a compound leaf. Remember we learned about simple versus compound? But so that would mean that this here is kind of, because it's a compound leaf, that's kind of like the midrib, although we call it the rachis. We'll have a reminder of that on subsequent slides. And then all of these are veins here. And then even in these little guys here, it has veins. So many veins. You can see them maybe more clearly here. And this is just another example of veins in fern leaves down here. So megaphyll means it has more than one vein. And ferns have megaphylls. is saying that we're going to have this little refresher. These are some terms that we've already come across when we did the leaf lab. But ferns have leaves, right? Megaphylls. And these are the parts of the fern leaf. So the fern leaf sometimes is called a frond, like the frond of a fern. Same thing, frond, leaf, same thing. You can use whichever you like. And as we learned before, so here, this whole thing right here, I'll keep going. Whoa, there. This whole thing right there is one leaf, or if you prefer it, one frond. And each leaf will have on it, right, a lamina or a blade. Either one is fine. Lamina or blade, that's this green portion here. A rachis, which is what would have been the midrib or the mid vein. So that's this part right here. I can draw it better maybe on this here. Here's the rachis, right? And then the petiole, which is basically the stem of the leaf, right? So here on this leaf that I'm drawing with, boom, there's a petiole. Here is another petiole. Here is another petiole. Another way to think of the rachis is it's kind of like the extension of the petiole the extension of the petiole once you get to that lamina or blade. Okay. So a lot of repetition from the leaf lab. As I mentioned before today, remember rhizome just means a horizontal stem. And because ferns are vascular, they have true leaves, true roots, true stems, because they have vascular tissue inside of those parts. A reminder that ferns, most ferns have compound leaves. And so this is a slide we saw during the leaf lab. So when you're seeing leaves anytime in the plant science lab, you should try to think about characteristics that you could use to describe that leaf, right? Is it simple or is it compound? You know, which of these leaves on this slide are compound? If you don't know the answer to that, you need to go back to the leaf lab. And then we also talked about other terms, which we're not going to repeat today, that were in the leaf lab. So you should also still know what a pinna is or a pinnule is. You should still know how to describe compound leaves as 1 times spinately compound, 2 times spinately compound, etc. Palmately compound, right? Shaped like a palm. So if these terms on the bottom are unfamiliar to you, you need to go back to that leaf lab. Okay. So ferns have leaves. Ferns have megaphyll leaves, right? Leaves with more than one vein. When fern leaves emerge or come out, they always emerge as something called a fiddlehead. So you can see examples of fiddleheads here. It's kind of a curlicue. Like here you go, whoa, curlicue. This one is starting to unravel. Look, this one is still super curled up and tight. Some fiddleheads are actually edible, but the importance of fiddleheads is that only ferns have fiddleheads. So if you ever see a plant and it has fiddleheads on it, you know without a doubt that it is a fern. So let's look at this video real quick. Remember, all the videos that are in any of the slide presentations are available via clicking them on Blackboard. So there's a whole folder of YouTube videos in Blackboard it's a separate folder from the recordings that I post there. All right, let's look at this. Let's make it big. It will go ungreen in a second. I know it looks funky right now. All right, so this is going to show you fern leaves emerging out of the soil. Oh, it didn't go green. Here, let's start it over. Oh, come on. Here, there we go. See? All right, let's go here. We'll go. Look. So it's emerging out of the soil as a fiddlehead. Look at the fiddlehead. So in this case, this fern has underground rhizomes, right? Underground rhizomes. But look at how it emerges, right? Look at how it emerges. It's pretty cool. I should mention this is not in real time, right? This is a time lapse. So this is not how fast it happens in real life, right? But yeah, so when you see fiddleheads on a plant, look how it now, so now they're all open and it's opened into what looks like a normal fern leaf, right? Super cool. Yeah. So anytime you see fiddleheads, you know without a doubt, without a doubt, oops, that you are encountering a fern. And I don't know if I said this before I went to the video, but some fern leaves some fiddleheads are actually edible. So sometimes you might go to a grocery store and see fiddleheads for sale in the vegetable section. And those are actually from ferns. Yep. So if you've ever had fiddleheads, I don't think I've ever had fiddleheads. I should try them. But if you have, they have come from ferns. All right, enough about fiddleheads. Let's look at some pictures to kind of like, decompress. So here are some ferns emerging. So there's in the middle of these two downed logs, there's some fiddleheads emerging. So if you were walking by, you'd say, ah, that's a fern. Here's some more fiddleheads emerging. Here's some fiddleheads that are just starting to unravel, right, to look like the more traditional fern leaf. Okay, so that's leaves about ferns. Now we need to talk a little bit about the sporangia. So when we talked about the non-vascular plants, we talked about sporangia, right? Sporangia are the structures or organs that make spores, right? That make spores. In the case of the ferns, the sporangia are located right on those leaves that we just looked at, right on those leaves. And they're located on the bottom side of the leaves. So if a fern is growing out like this in nature, it's not going to be on the top. It's going to be on the sporangia are going to be on the bottom side of those leaves. You might be seeing these words here. Adaxial means top, abaxial means bottom. A good way to remember which is that b has a b in it, and abaxial refers to the underside or bottom of a leaf. So that's how I remember it. Adaxial is top, abaxial, bottom is on the bottom side of the leaf. So ferns, sporangia are on the bottom side of the leaves, or the abaxial side of the leaves. And this is what they look like. So let me look at your lab handout real quick to see if I could point out some structures here. Yeah, okay. So this looks a little bit different than the sporangia that we saw during the non-vascular plant lab. So the sporangia still is elevated by a little stalk. And it's still kind of this shape, it's like a round shape here. These are spores inside. Each of these is a spore inside, little jelly bean looking things. But the fern sporangia has a unique structure that is called the annulus. Can I write? I wonder if I can write. Let's see. Ooh, this is useful. Should try this more often. Annulus. Annulus is a term that's in your lab, and annulus is a kind of a ring-shaped cell structure. So it's a ring-shaped structure made of special cells. And here it is here. This is the ring-shaped structure made of special cells. Here, see kind of here. It would continue over here as well to like a ring shape. And that annulus, which just went away, that annulus, right? Annulus is made of these special cells, and what the special cells do, and I think I have it on the next slide, do I? Yeah, I do. What these special cells do is they allow the fern sporangia to shoot spores like a catapult, literally like a catapult. So here's that annulus again. Here it is, all around the edge. And the special cells that make up the annulus, right, annulus, are sensitive to changes in humidity in the air. And when the humidity changes in such a way, it causes the cells to change shape such that they pull back, kind of constrict. And this whole thing here opens up like almost like a Pac-Man. Whoa, like that. Whoa, because of the annulus cells stretching due to changes in humidity. When that happens, then eventually there's a, because of physics, eventually it has to give, and then it throws. And when it does that, it's going to throw all of these spores out of the sporangia like a catapult. Oh, I need water today. Okay. And of course, yes, I have videos that show this. So we're going to look at 2 of them right now, briefly. Again, these will be in that folder on Blackboard. And if you want to learn more about how these work, like the physics of it, there's also a video there you could watch. But for now, let's just look at this. So here, right. So, okay, so each of those little brown things are a sporangium. And you can see kind of here, let me pause for a sec. Ooh, I can annotate this, right? So each of these, so like here's one. This is the top of a sporangia of a fern. Here's another one. They're all grouped together here, right? Here's another one. And each of them has an annulus. And in this video, the annulus looks kind of like, I don't know, caramel. It's like this thing here, this rimmed thing here. Here's one here on that. Here's one here. Those are all the annulus of each. Look, here's another here. There's another here. Those are all annulus. And so now that you know where the annulus are, watch, and where the sporangia are, watch how, if I can get it going. Yeah, so watch them stretch and throw the spores. It'll get closer in a second. Yeah, see? And so I should mention that this is happening in, ooh, there's a good one over here. It's gonna shoot it. Oh, yes. Look, here's a good one here. Oh, and so I should mention that this is happening in real time. This is not a time lapse. This is happening. Oh, here's one right here in the middle. Opening up like a Pac-Man. Shoot the spores out. So cool. Yeah, so this is not a time lapse. This is happening in real time, in real time. There's another one right here. Wow. And see, the annulus recoils at the end. Does this one get closer? No. So that's one video. Super, super cool. Let's make this a little smaller so that I can get to the next one. Here we go. Make this bigger. And don't worry about what the person is saying. He's just talking about ferns. But so this is another type of fern. In this case, the sporangia are clustered in kind of these like slug shape or like looking things, right? These thick lines. And this one's going to get closer. It's just giving you a perspective of, we're going to kind of like move in and zoom in to get closer and closer. So remember, this is the underside of the fern leaves, right? The abaxial side of the fern leaves. And under those membranes, which we'll learn about what those membranes are in a second, under those kind of brown membranes, underneath it, look, they're starting to poke out. Here, I'll show you. Ooh, there's one poked right out. So in this species of fern, the sporangia are protected by a membrane, which we're going to learn about in a few slides. But just so you don't worry about the membrane too much right now, but this thing on top is that membrane. And you can see here, let me switch colors because it's kind of dark. This membrane, underneath the membrane is all the sporangia. And so look, here they're starting to really poke out. And this is all due to like changes in humidity. Look, here's a sporangia that's already poked out of the membrane and it's gonna shoot its spores. So let's watch that. Okay, look, it's gonna shoot it. Boom! Sorry, I get really excited. So this is cool. We're gonna zoom in. There's a whole bunch of sporangia there. You should be able to see the annulus of each one. And again, this is not a time lapse. This is in real time. There they go. Shooting the spores. Oh, here he goes. Oh, yes. Catapult. Sorry, I could watch this all day. We go shoot the spores. Okay. See the annulus right there? Great. Oh boy, getting in real close. There's one about to shoot. Oh, and it shot the spores. Yeah, so feel free to watch these whole videos on your own. Look at the spores. And it shot it out. Super, super cool. And yeah, so there you go. That is ferns shooting their spores out with their biological catapults. And if you want to learn more about how that is, how that even works, if you go to Blackboard in the YouTube recordings, in that folder of YouTube recordings, not the recorded lectures, there is a one there about learning more about how the fern catapults work. Biological catapults. All right. So, as we saw in the videos, and also we've already mentioned, the sporangia are located on the bottom side of the leaves, right? Bottom side of the leaves. And the sporangia are usually arranged in clusters or groups that are called sori. Like sori, not sori, right? No. Sori. Sori is the plural of sorus. This is a sorus is a group. I really want to make a dinosaur joke, but I'm not. A sorus is a group of sporangia, and many of those is called sori, right? Sori, not sori. Can't help myself. All right, so here's one sorus, right? So this is a group of fern sporangia on the bottom side of the leaf. Here's another sorus, which is a cluster or group of sporangia, right? Sporangia that are arranged in clusters. Here are 4 sori. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the sori are kind of grouped in like circles or dots, like on this left one. Sometimes the sori is grouped in lines. Here's another one where the sori is grouped in circles or dots. So there's a lot of diversity in the color of the sporangia, and also the orientation, so linear or round orientation of the clusters of the sporangia. Tons of diversity in ferns with that. Okay, so on the video I was mentioning the special membrane that was covering some of the sporangia. And that's because some species of ferns have sporangia that are protected by the special membrane. And that special membrane has a name. It's called Enthusiam, or the plural is Enthusia. So on the previous slide, none of these fern species have Enthusiam, right? There's no special membrane covering the sporangia. There isn't. They're just there. You can see them with your eye, all those little dots. But these fern species have this special membrane that's called an Enthusiam. So if you look here, so here is a sorus, right? Here is another sorus, a different fern species. And all of these little dots around are the sporangia. And this little umbrella-looking thing right here is the Enthusiam. And it is kind of like a little umbrella-looking thing. So think about if you're out on a hot day and maybe you're at the beach and you put up a little beach umbrella so that you could sit underneath it because it's a little bit more comfortable. That's kind of what the Enthusiam is like. It's just like a little membrane, kind of keeps humidity in a nicer way around the sporangia so that they don't dry out too quickly. So species that have Enthusiam might live in areas where maybe it's a little bit more dry, right? So maybe not a tropical rainforest. Enthusiams can be all different types of shapes. Like this one kind of almost looks like a little hamburger. Can you tell I'm hungry? But anyways, yeah, so Enthusiam. Here is a cross section through a fern leaf to help you see the Enthusiam better. So let's annotate with a different color because this is kind of a blue slide. I'll do, I guess, bright green. So this is the fern leaf right here. I'm going to erase that, but that's the cross section of the fern leaf right there. Hey, no. Oy, get out of that. And this is the top of the fern leaf. This is the bottom or abaxial side of the fern leaf, right? And looky here. So this thing hanging down is like that little beach umbrella that I was talking about before, the Enthusiam. And underneath the Enthusiam is all of this Sporangia. So here, this is a good one to look at. So here is a stalk and here's the annulus of a single sporangium, right? Here's another top of another sporangium. But all of these things here, all of these things underneath are sporangia. Cool. So some species of fern have an Enthusiam. Some species of fern don't. And some species of fern have evolved a different way to protect their sporangia from drying out. And it's called a false Enthusiam. And all that is the leaf. So the leaf margins are the edge of the leaf. And so the leaf edge in some species of fern actually folds over the sporangia and gives them that little layer of protection. And we call it a false Enthusiam because it's serving the same purpose as an Enthusiam, right? It's protecting the sporangia from drying out. But it's not a new membrane like an Enthusiam. An Enthusiam is a whole new membrane that exists solely to take care of protecting the sporangia. Leaf edge folding over, it's not a whole new membrane, but it serves the same purpose. Right. And yes, so when the humidity conditions are right for that species of fern, then the sporangia are going to shoot out their spores, as we saw in the videos. Okay, so that's Sporophyte generation. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the Gametophyte generation in detail. And some of this might look familiar, right? This heart-shaped green thing, because we used ferns in the last lecture, lecture lab. We used ferns in the last class to introduce the idea of alternation of generations, right? So we saw this heart-shaped guy before. So the Gametophyte generation of ferns is this heart-shaped, simple phallus, right? It's this very simple, flat, green, heart-shaped thing. It's green, so we know it's photosynthetic. And it is anchored by rhizoids. What are rhizoids? Well, we already learned about rhizome, which was a horizontal stem. Rhizoids are different, but they're basically these little hairs. See these little hairs down here? Like here's one, here's one, here's one. All those little hairs on the base of that fern gametophyte are rhizoids. So rhizoids are little hairs that help anchor the gametophyte to, let's say, a rock. You know, it doesn't want to just be washed away by water, and it doesn't have roots or anything like that. It's just a little green flat thing. And so the rhizoids are these hair-like things that help attach the gametophyte plants to things. As we learned last time, right, there's two sex organs on gametophyte plants. There's archegonia, which bear eggs, and there's antheridia, which makes, so archegonia bear eggs, which stay inside of the archegonium, and antheridia makes sperm that swim out and leave to find eggs. And on the fern gametophyte, the archegonia are located near what's called the apical notch. You remember that term apical meristem from classes back? Right here is the location of a meristem, but it's kind of in this little notch. So that's why they call that apical notch. You don't need to know the term apical notch, but just in case you see it. So the archegonia are located toward the center, and the antheridia are all spread out on the gametophyte plant of ferns. Oh, I don't want to annotate. I think it's okay. So that was a sorry, let's go back. That was a, I want to go back. Here. This is a fern gametophyte plant if you looked at it, let's say under a dissecting microscope or even maybe with a magnifying glass, because they are still visible with the naked eye, but they are small. And so this next slide is to show you how small is it? And it's very small. Let me use yellow. So in this is somebody's fingers holding a fern gametophyte plant and so the actual gametophyte plant itself is only this part, that heart-shaped part. The thing emerging out of that heart-shaped part is already the sporophyte plant. So the egg in this fern gametophyte plant has already been fertilized and the young sporophyte plant's already growing out. But this, oh, that looks funny. That's from the apical notch. Okay. Yeah, but the point is just this little thing here. This is how very small they are. Is this part here is the gametophyte plant. And think about that. So when we were looking at the non-vascular plants, I told you that in general, when you're walking around, you see green moss, you're looking at the gametophyte plant, right? This gametophyte plant in the non-vascular plants is dominant, but the gametophyte plant in the vascular plants is not dominant. It's reduced. And so chances are, if you're walking around in the forest or wherever, you're not going to go, whoa, look at that fern gametophyte, right? Because look how small it is. So very small. So when you say, hey, I saw a fern today, you're most likely talking about a fern sporophyte plant. Cool. Oh, didn't have to draw. I circled it in orange. Okay, well, there you go. That's good for the slides later if you're reviewing the slides later. All right, so this is what we covered last time with the introduction to alternation of generations, right? So we're not going to go through this one again. If you want to go through this one again, look at the previous recording for Lab 7. But now we're going to just kind of look at a little bit more complex version of this now that we know more about ferns and the parts of the sporophyte and the gametophyte of ferns. So this is that same thing. This, hold on, this, here, just to get you oriented. This is, let's say, this is the fern gametophyte plant, right, on this diagram. And then it continues through the life cycle going this way. On the next slide, that fern gametophyte plant, same one, is here, and it's going to go through this way, right? So it's kind of tilted. On the previous slide, the fern gametophyte plant's at like the 6 o'clock position. Here, the fern gametophyte plant's at the 3 o'clock position, but it's still the same cycle. This just has a little bit more detail. Let's go through it. Let's go through it now that we know some of these terms. So here, I'll use the same. I think I used blue for sporophyte and yellow for gametophyte. Here is your fern sporophyte plant, right? See, adult sporophyte, which is diploid. It has to be diploid because it's a sporophyte plant. It's going to make spores, so it has to be diploid. And as we learned, right, here's that horizontal stem or the rhizome of the sporophyte plant. Right, here is a leaf of a sporophyte plant and its parts, right? Petiole, rachis, lamina, or blade. Here is a young leaf coming out, right, which is a fiddlehead. You can see it right here, right? There's another little fiddlehead below that. And on the bottom side of these leaves are these, in this case, clusters of sori, right? Or sori, which are clusters of the sporangia. So we learned all these terms just now. We go to the next part. So now we're going to go close up on a cross section through a leaf. Here is a cluster of sporangia, right? One sorus. There is no, we don't see any umbrella thing here, so there's no Enthusiam on this species of fern. This is a close-up of a sporangium. And inside of that sporangium are spore-producing tissue, which is 2N. those cells that make up that spore-producing tissue inside of that sporangium are going to undergo meiosis, right? Undergo meiosis, and at that point, the cells will go from 2N or diploid to haploid or 1N, and the result will be spores, right? Spores that are 1N. N. Here is that annulus opening the sporangium like the Pac-Man that we just saw in the videos, right? It's opening it up and it's going to flick them out. So here's all the spores getting ready to get flicked out, and here they are, right? On the move. So that's where this slide leaves off, right? Here, let's just look at one spore. Let's look at this spore here. This is one spore, which is haploid, right? Because it already went through meiosis. And the spore is going to fly out on the wind, land somewhere, and start to grow. Grow via what process, right? Grow via what? Grow. When you think grow, what process is happening there, right? Mitosis, right? Mitosis. So the spores are going to grow. And what are they going to grow into? They're going to grow into the young gametophyte plant, right? Here is the spore here. Here is the heart-shaped young gametophyte plant growing out of the spore. Growing out of the spore. Remember, rhizoids are these hair things, these hair-like things that are going to help the gametophyte attach itself to something like a rock. So now we have our heart-shaped, fully grown heart-shaped gametophyte plant. On that heart-shaped gametophyte plant are sex organs, right? Because it's a gametophyte, gametes, egg and sperm. So it's going to have sex organs on this gametophyte plant. One of the sex organs is here, and they blow it up for you right here, right? This is your archegonium. One of the sex organs here, going to blow it up for you here, is an antheridium. Archegonium is going to make egg, which is N, right? Archegonium is also N because it's part of the gametophyte plant. And the antheridium is going to make sperm, right? Okay. Just to point this out, because we're going to see something later that isn't like this. So most fern species have sporophyte plants that only make one type of spore, right? So this spore and the spore here and all the spores here are all the same in that they're the same in morphology, and they're the same. They have the same information inside of them. They're the same. They're all the same spores. So the ferns have sporophytes that make one. That's fine. One spore type. And the gametophytes that grow out of those spores grow outside of the spore. So here's that spore down here. And look, the gametophyte plant is growing outside of it. So this is where we left off before. Here we go. We have the antheridium is now mature, and it made all this sperm, right? Here's a close-up of a sperm. Plant sperm is really weird looking. There's a lot of different shapes and morphology. Like this one is kind of like a squiggly curlicue thing with a lot of flagella on top. And the egg is inside of the archegonium, right? Here's mature archegonium. Here's the egg. And what do you know? Here is the sperm. The sperm's going to swim, 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 swim. Boom. Fertilize the egg. And when that happens, we call that fertilization. And as soon as that happens, immediately we have the new sporophyte generation, the diploid or 2N zygote. And then this now should start feeling a little familiar because we've gone through this a couple times. But that's 2N zygote is going to undergo growth. It's going to grow. How is it going to grow? It's going to grow via mitosis, right? So here's that 2N zygote. It's going to grow via mitosis into a young embryo. Notice we're in blue because we're all diploid now. And then don't worry about this so much, but the point is that it's going to keep growing until it's a mature sporophyte plant. Notice, I can't say this enough because people get confused about this. Notice this, right? This is still here. This is still Gametophyte plant that's attached to the growing Sporophyte plant. Why? Because remember, egg stays. Egg stays. So this is an archegonium. The egg was inside of there. And now that the sperm is fertilized, the egg, the zygote is in there as well. So eventually the Sporophyte plant will grow big enough that it doesn't need the Gametophyte plant anymore. So here is this is our heart-shaped Gametophyte plant, which is haploid. Here is our young Sporophyte plant growing bigger, bigger, bigger. Once it has a root and grows a leaf or two, then the Gametophyte plant will go away. It'll just decompose. And now, boom, you're back to your full, mature Sporophyte plant via mitosis, right? Cool. So very similar to what we went to before, but now we have a few other players that we can add because we've learned more about parts of the fern, sporophytes, and Gametophyte plants. You don't need to memorize these fern species that I'm going to show you now, but I'm including them because if we would have had lab in person, you would have been able to see these, or at least dried specimens of these in some cases. And I'm just going to show them to you because these are ferns that you might encounter on your day-to-day life. And if you do encounter them, you can say, hey, I know what that is because Rebecca taught me, okay? So this is one fern. It's called the rock polypody or the common polypody. It's something, look, the sporangia are in the clusters of sori that are yellow on the underside of the leaf. And this is a type of fern, doesn't grow that big. The leaves are maybe about a foot tall at most. But they're common on like rocky outcrops on the sides of mountains and cliffs and things like that. Okay, that's one. Here's a picture of it growing off a cliff. I've also seen them growing on rocks. This is another common fern in our region. This is called sensitive fern. Sensitive fern is called sensitive fern because it is very sensitive to frost. So if there has been a frost in your area, the sensitive fern leaves will turn yellow and start to die right away. And so it can be useful if you're kind of doing something outdoors and you're like, well, what's the temperature been like? Has there been a frost yet? If you see sensitive fern and it's yellow because it's starting to die, you say, oh, yeah, there's definitely been a frost here. Sensitive fern has two types of leaves, which a lot of ferns do. One type of leaf is the normal leaf that you're used to seeing, which is green and has a lamina and has a rachis and has a petiole. And one leaf carries all of the spores. So sometimes ferns, so let's go back real quick. Sometimes ferns have their sporangia located on the underside of their leaves that look like normal leaves. But sometimes the leaves that have the sporangia don't look like a leaf at all, even though they are morphologically a leaf. And this is the case in sensitive. Oops, sorry. Try to get more comfortable here. This is the case in sensitive fern. So here, this is the more normal leaf that you're used to seeing. And then here, this is a special spore-bearing leaf where each of the leaflets are kind of rolled over and there's sporangia inside. Sometimes people use these in flower arrangements. Believe it or not, I've seen these dried and used in flower arrangements. So FYI. Christmas fern is another super common fern in our area. It has sporangia located in clusters on the bottom side of the leaves and the leaflets. And the way to tell Christmas fern from other ferns is that the leaflet kind of looks like a mitten. These ferns are called Christmas ferns because they're commonly used in holiday decorations. For whatever reason, I don't know why. This is just showing the sori of the sporangia on the underside of the leaf of a Christmas fern. This is another common fern in our area, Maidenhair Fern. When we talk about, in the next class, when we talk about the gymnosperms, we're going to come in contact with a tree that actually gets its name because of this fern, because of the shape of the fern leaves. Maidenhair fern is something people, like if you've ever been to a botanic garden or something in our region, they often plant these in the kind of temple gardens. This is an example of a fern where we don't even try to describe if it's 1 times or 2 times or 3 times pinnately compound. This is one fern leaf of Maidenhair fern, and it's just too complicated. So we just say we don't even say. We say it's many times pinnately compound. Maidenhair fern is also one of the species that has that false Enthusiam that we talked about, right? So where the leaf margin or edge rolls over on top of the sporangia to protect them, right? So here's one here. Here's one false Enthusiam here. Bracken fern, it can grow really, really big. Sometimes I've seen bracken fern be, 5 feet tall. One leaf is like 5 feet tall. Just another example of a plant that has this false Enthusiam. So this is the edge of a leaf and it's rolled over, and all the sporangia are located under this leaf edge that's rolled over. Cinnamon fern is another common one. It has also those 2 types of leaves, so some leaves that are just normal and green, and then some leaves that only bear the sporangia. It's called cinnamon fern because the spore-bearing leaves look kind of cinnamony. Also, when it's fall, the whole plant turns this very beautiful orange color, kind of like a cinnamon color. So this is in the genus Osmunda. Some of you got that wrong on, I think I mentioned that the last time, right? This species name is Osmunda cinnamonia, right? Cinnamon fern. That's the whole species name. The first part, Osmunda, that is the genus. That is the genus. So this fern is in the genus Osmunda. And there's a few here that are in the genus Osmunda. So here's another species that's in the genus Osmunda. This is the interrupted fern. The reason why it's called the interrupted fern is because on one leaf, this whole thing here is one leaf, these spore-bearing leaflets interrupt the leaf. So you have green leaflets down here, green leaflets up here on this leaf, and then right here in the middle are the spore-bearing leaflets, and they interrupt the leaf blade. If you're ever walking around, if you didn't know that and you saw this, you might think, oh, something's wrong with this fern. This fern looks sick. Something burned these leaves. But no, that's actually its spore-bearing leaflets on there. Oh, there you go. See, if you were walking around and you saw this in the middle of the fern leaf, you might think to yourself, ooh, what's going on there? Is that from an insect or something? But nope, that's just normal, how it grows. Another Osmunda is this cinnamon fern. Cinnamon fern has the spore-bearing, sorry, not cinnamon fern, royal fern. Royal fern. Royal fern has the spore-bearing leaflets on the top of the leaf like a crown. That's why it's called royal fern. And that's another Osmunda. And then last but not least, just to show you differences between these Osmundas, right? In the cinnamon fern, you had one leaf dedicated to producing spores, one leaf dedicated to just doing photosynthesis with no spores on it. In the interrupted fern, the leaflets in the middle of the leaf are the ones with the sporangia on them, and they interrupt the leaf blade. Here's the leaf blade. And then lastly, the royal fern has the spore-bearing leaflets on the top like a crown. So again, you don't have to memorize this, but it's one thing, if you're learning about plants, it's one thing to just learn like the terms and everything, but it's another thing to kind of appreciate. You're going to be walking around plants in life. In life, you walk by plants every day, even if you don't notice it. And so since these ferns occur very, very commonly in our region, I figured I'd take a few minutes to point them out to you so that when you're walking around, you can appreciate them. Okay. Oops. Oh, and then the circles refer to the parts that are fertile or bear sporangia. Okay. Whew. That was the lycopods. Let's see, we're an hour in. I think I'm going to, what do we have? We have lycopods, and then we have horsetails. Yeah. So this would be a good time for me to pause and stop And so we're going to continue Lab 8 in the next YouTube video. So I will see you guys there, where we will begin talking about the lycopods.